She was shaking, covered in someone else's blood, and still begging for her job back. The manager didn't even look at her, just pointed to the door. No apology, no explanation, just, "You're fired." She hadn't stolen. She hadn't lied. She'd only tried to help the man they all worshipped upstairs, the one no one ever sees. But here's the part no one knows. The man who ruined her life was the same man who would one day fall in love with her. Before I tell you what happened that night, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and tell me where you're watching from, city and time. I want to know how far this story travels. Because when you hear what she asked him for, and what he said yes to, you'll understand why some nights change everything. If you're watching this after midnight, maybe you were meant to hear her story. She stood in the hallway, soaked to the bone, clutching the maid's uniform she'd worn for 3 years. The marble floor beneath her feet gleamed like ice, and every step she took away from that door felt heavier than the last. They didn't even let her explain. One shattered glass, one accident, and her world collapsed in seconds. The others had watched in silence, too afraid to speak, too loyal to the man upstairs. She wanted to scream, to tell them she hadn't done anything wrong. But the words caught in her throat, because even if she had spoken, who would have believed the maid? Outside, the city lights blurred through the rain. She walked for blocks without knowing where she was going, just away, away from the humiliation, away from the whispers, away from him. But as she crossed Fifth Avenue, she stopped, because she realized she didn't want to run forever. The truth was cruel. The one man who'd caused her pain was also the only one who could fix it. She turned back toward the tower she'd just been thrown out of, the glass building that touched the clouds. Somewhere up there, behind those blacked-out windows, he was probably drinking his expensive whiskey, pretending people like her didn't exist. She hated him for it. She hated herself even more for what she was about to do. Her hands trembled as she reached for the service elevator key she still had. She told herself this wasn't about pride anymore, it was about survival. And as the elevator doors closed, sealing her fate, she whispered the words that would change everything. Just one night. That's all I need. When the doors opened again, he was standing there, the man she'd only seen from a distance, the man who never noticed anyone below his world of glass and gold. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, wet hair clinging to her cheeks, uniform crumpled in her hands, eyes full of defiance and something he couldn't name. And then, with a voice steady but breaking inside, she said it. "I want one night with you." The room fell silent. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to stop. He didn't ask why. He didn't hesitate. And that night changed everything. 3 weeks earlier, the mansion hadn't felt like a prison. It was simply where she worked, where her days blended into quiet obedience. Every morning, Sienna Brooks arrived before sunrise, invisible, efficient, forgettable. She cleaned rooms filled with things she could never afford, silk curtains, crystal chandeliers, paintings that cost more than her mother's house. She never touched what she didn't need to, never spoke unless spoken to. It was safer that way. In a world built by people like him, silence was survival. But that morning, the silence shattered. There was a party scheduled for that evening, a charity gala for the city's elite. Sienna was polishing the silver in the grand dining room when she heard the crash. A tray of imported wine glasses, gone. A red stain spreading across a white tablecloth, and standing above it, the man everyone feared disappointing, Ethan Cole. He wasn't supposed to be there. He never came down before noon, but that day he did. His voice was calm at first, too calm. "Who was responsible for this?" he asked. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, as if fate had chosen her, the head butler turned and pointed. "It was her, sir." The room went cold. Sienna tried to speak, to explain that she hadn't even touched the tray, that another maid had brushed against it. But the words froze under his stare. Ethan Cole wasn't a man used to accidents. His life was built on precision, contracts, calculations, control. Mistakes didn't happen in his world. People did. He looked at her with something unreadable, not anger, not pity, something quieter, something that made her chest tighten. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Clean it up," he said, and then he walked away. She spent the next hour on her knees, scrubbing away the red until it disappeared, or so she thought. But the stain wasn't on the tablecloth anymore. It was on her reputation. By sunset, the whispers had started. By nightfall, the head maid told her she'd been reassigned to kitchen duty. By morning, she was nothing but a rumor. That evening, as the party began, Sienna stood hidden behind a service door, watching the ballroom come alive, crystal lights, elegant laughter, and the man at the center of it all. Ethan Cole, billionaire, CEO, untouchable. She watched him greet investors with that same calm, collected smile. She hated how easily he existed in that world, while hers kept falling apart. But what she didn't know was that he'd already noticed her, the way her hands shook when she reached for the broken glass, the way she refused to cry even when humiliated. And somewhere between the first toast and the last dance, he made a decision, one that would destroy the distance between their worlds forever. The night of the gala glowed like gold and glass, a dream Sienna could only watch from the shadows. She stood behind the service door in the hallway, half hidden by the flickering light of the sconces. Every movement inside felt like another reminder of where she didn't belong. She should have left early. Instead, she lingered, drawn by a strange pull she couldn't explain. From her corner she could see him, Ethan Cole, surrounded by power and perfection. His tuxedo fit like armor. His smile looked like something carved, not real. But there was something else beneath it, something tired. He raised a glass to make a toast. Cameras flashed, the crowd cheered, and still, for a fraction of a second, his eyes drifted toward the doorway, toward her. She stepped back too quickly. The tray in her hands trembled, and the sound of silver forks clattered to the floor. Heads turned. Someone hissed her name. She froze. A hand caught the tray before it fell. His hand. Ethan looked down at her, silent. The crowd's attention shifted back to the music, but he stayed. For a moment the world shrank to just the two of them, her breath shallow, his expression unreadable. He set the tray back on the table, leaned close enough that she could smell the faint trace of his cologne, sharp, expensive, distant, and said quietly, "You're trembling." She stepped back. "I'm fine, sir." "You don't look fine," he replied. Before she could answer, another guest called his name. He turned away without another word, leaving her with nothing but the echo of his voice and a heart beating too fast. Later, when the party ended and the laughter died, Sienna returned to the empty dining room to clean what was left. Lipstick stains on glasses, half-melted candles, a single lost earring on the floor. She was used to erasing evidence of other people's nights. But that night, she found something she wasn't supposed to, a folded envelope resting on the edge of the table. Her name was written on it in ink she recognized immediately. Inside was a note, short, precise, and unsettling. "My office. Tomorrow, noon." It wasn't signed, but it didn't have to be. The next morning, she climbed the glass elevator to the top floor for the first time. Her reflection followed her up, the maid's uniform, the tired eyes, the trembling hands. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world made of marble and silence. Ethan Cole was waiting behind a desk large enough to make anyone feel small. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, the corners of his mouth moved. Not a smile, not yet. Something else. "Sit," he said. And as she obeyed, she felt it. The weight of something she couldn't name. A meeting that wasn't about punishment or even forgiveness. Something in his eyes said this was only the beginning. She sat on the edge of the chair, knees pressed together, eyes fixed on the floor. The office was nothing like she imagined. Walls of glass, shelves of awards, and the soft scent of cedar and ink. It was a world too still for someone like her. Ethan Cole didn't speak for a long time. He signed a few documents, closed a silver pen, and finally looked up. "You've worked here for how long?" he asked. 3 years, sir," she whispered, "and you were almost fired last week." Her throat tightened. "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you defend yourself?" She blinked, unsure if it was a trap. "No one listens when you're wearing this," she said, glancing at the uniform. "They only see mistakes." He studied her for a moment, and in that moment, she couldn't tell if he felt pity or curiosity. Then he leaned back, hands folded. "Tell me something, Miss Brooks. What do you want?" It wasn't a question about her job. It was something else. Too heavy, too personal. She hesitated, because the truth wasn't something she could say out loud. She wanted a life that didn't hurt so much. She wanted to stop choosing between pride and survival. "I don't know," she finally said. He tilted his head, as if trying to decide what to do with her honesty. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, "Everyone wants something, even if they pretend they don't." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the skyline. Rain streaked the glass. The city below looked smaller from here, unreal. "There's an event next weekend," he said. "I need additional staff. You'll assist the catering director directly. Double pay for the night." Sienna frowned. "Why me, sir?" "Because you don't talk too much," he replied, still looking out the window. "And because I'd like to see if you make the same mistake twice." The words stung. She stood to leave, clutching the envelope of instructions he'd slid across the desk. "Thank you, sir," she managed, though she didn't know if she meant it. He didn't answer. But just before she reached the door, his voice came quietly, almost an afterthought. "Miss Brooks, everyone deserves one chance to change their story. Don't waste yours." She didn't look back. Not yet. But when she stepped into the elevator, she realized her hands were trembling again. That night, lying awake in her small apartment, she couldn't stop replaying his words. One chance to change her story. She didn't know that soon, desperation would make her test what those words truly meant. And when she did, the price of that chance would be far more than she could ever imagine. The week passed like a blur. Between extra shifts and her mother's hospital calls, Sienna barely slept. Every night she promised herself she'd quit after the event. Just one more night, she told herself, then she'd walk away. But promises are easy when your world is falling apart slowly. The morning of the gala, she found another hospital message on her phone. The doctors needed payment by midnight or treatment would stop. Her chest went tight, her fingers went cold. She had already sold everything she owned except her mother's bracelet. That evening, she dressed in her uniform and tried not to think about the deadline ticking in her head. The hotel ballroom glittered like something from another life. Gold candles, strings of white orchids, laughter echoing off glass walls. She focused on the tasks. Pour, serve, clear, smile. Nothing more. Then she saw him. Ethan Cole arrived late, surrounded by people who looked like perfection. Cameras followed him. When he smiled, flashes burst. But when the crowd turned away, the smile faded, replaced by something sharper, quieter. He didn't see her at first. She told herself that was good. She didn't need any more complications, but fate doesn't care about plans. When the violinist began to play, a hand brushed her shoulder. His voice came low. "Miss Brooks, you're late on the champagne service." Her heart jumped. "Sorry, sir," she whispered, turning toward him. He looked different tonight, more human, less untouchable, tired maybe, or curious. He took a glass from her tray but didn't walk away. "Have you thought about what I said?" She swallowed hard. "About changing my story?" "About not wasting your chance," he corrected. "You're not invisible, Ms. Brooks. Stop pretending to be." She almost laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. He didn't understand that invisibility was the only reason she'd survived this long. Before she could answer, one of the guests bumped her elbow. The tray tilted. Champagne spilled across the tablecloth. Again, the sound of shattering glass cut through the music. Every head turned, the same humiliation, the same cold stares, a repetition of the nightmare she thought she'd escaped. The head caterer rushed forward, face red. "Get out, now!" Sienna opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She saw Ethan across the table, jaw tight, watching her. She turned and ran, pushing through the back hallway, out the service door into the rain. Outside, she broke. The weight of her mother's bills, her lost job, her humiliation. All of it pressed down until she couldn't breathe. For a long moment, she just stood there under the downpour, letting it drown the noise in her head. And then, slowly, an idea began to form. It was wild, reckless, but it was all she had left. One night. That's what it would take. Just one night to change everything. She didn't know if it would save her or destroy her, but by dawn she knew what she had to do. She went home, wrote a note, packed a small bag, and waited for the morning. When the city lights faded into gray, she took a deep breath, looked at her reflection one last time, and whispered, "One night." And with that, she left for the tower. The city was still half asleep when she arrived. The streets shimmered with the reflection of traffic lights, and the tower that bore his name stood high above the clouds, silent, unreachable, waiting. Sienna walked through the side entrance, head low, uniform hidden beneath a coat too thin for the cold. The security guard barely looked at her. She'd come and gone through these doors 1,000 times before, but this morning felt different, heavier, like the air itself knew she shouldn't be there. The elevator ride felt endless. Floor after floor, the numbers blinked until only one remained, the top. Her pulse matched the sound of the ascending gears. By the time the doors slid open, her palms were damp. His office was quiet, lit only by the dim blue of morning. He stood by the window, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled, looking down at the city as if trying to solve it. She stopped in the doorway. "Mr. Cole." He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his expression was unreadable, calm, controlled, but his eyes looked like he'd been awake all night. "You shouldn't be here," he said. She nodded once. "I know." "Then why are you?" The words caught in her throat. She could still feel the cold from the night before, the sting of humiliation. She wanted to tell him everything, about the hospital, the bills, the way her life had unraveled, but pride was louder than pain. So instead, she said the only word she could manage. "Because I don't have anywhere else to go." He exhaled, walked to the desk, and poured himself coffee. No reaction, no sympathy, just that same distance he carried like armor. "You think one night in my office will change that?" She met his gaze. For the first time, she didn't look away. "Not your office," she said quietly. "You." The words hung between them. His hand froze around the cup. For a heartbeat, the world was soundless. No city, no hum, no breath. "Say that again," he said, but his voice was different now, low, uncertain. "One night," she whispered. "That's all I'm asking for." He didn't move, didn't speak. The air between them thickened with everything she couldn't explain. Then he walked past her, closed the office door, and turned the lock. "You don't know what you're asking for," he said. "I know exactly what I'm asking for," she replied, "and I'm not asking again." A moment passed, long enough for her to regret every word, long enough for him to look at her like he was seeing something he didn't understand. Then quietly he said, "Fine, one night." He walked to the lights and turned them down until only the city's glow filled the room. Rain began again, faint against the windows, as if the sky itself had been waiting for permission. Sienna didn't move. Neither did he. The silence wasn't comfortable. but it wasn't cruel either. It was a silence full of everything neither of them knew how to say. And somewhere between that silence and the storm, the night began, the one that would unravel everything they thought they knew about themselves. The clock on the far wall ticked like a heartbeat. Neither of them spoke. The air felt too fragile, too full of the things both were afraid to admit. She stood near the door, clutching the strap of her worn bag. He stayed by the window, one hand pressed against the glass. Sienna could see his reflection, tall, composed, but something in his shoulders had changed. He wasn't the same man who'd ordered her out of the ballroom. There was something heavier now, human. "Sit down," he said finally. She obeyed, setting the bag at her feet. Her pulse pounded so hard she could barely hear the rain. He poured 2 glasses of water, placed one in front of her, and leaned against the desk. "You're not here for what you think you are," he said. "Then tell me what I'm here for," she replied softly. He hesitated. The billionaire who terrified boardrooms suddenly looked unsure. He glanced toward the window again, where dawn was just starting to blur the skyline. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me without wanting something?" Sienna frowned. "I'm not asking for charity." "No," he said, almost smiling. "You're asking for something harder, honesty." For a moment neither spoke. The silence grew thick with the things both were afraid to name. She wanted to hate him, for his wealth, his indifference, for having everything she'd never had. But now, sitting across from him in that half-light, all she saw was loneliness, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "Why me?" she asked. "You could have anyone." "Maybe that's the problem," he said. "Everyone I could have, I don't want." Her breath caught. She didn't know if it was a confession or a warning, maybe both. The city outside began to wake, the sound of early taxis, the hum of a world that never stopped. In that quiet space above it all, time seemed to bend. He turned toward her again, his eyes searching. "Tell me what you need from this night." She swallowed. "I need to feel like my life isn't falling apart, just once." He nodded slowly. "And if I can't give you that, then at least I tried." He walked closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of coffee and rain on his clothes. He stopped an arm's length away, watching her as if memorizing a secret. "No contracts," he said. "No promises. Just truth." "Truth," she repeated. For the rest of the night there were no more questions. They didn't speak of the world outside or the lines they'd crossed just by being there. They talked about everything and nothing, about childhood dreams, the fear of becoming like their parents, the sound of rain when you're alone. At some point she laughed, really laughed, and he looked startled, as if the sound had broken something inside him that had been frozen for years. Hours passed unnoticed. When the first light of dawn brushed across the skyline, she rose quietly. He was still by the window, hands in his pockets, eyes on the city below. She whispered, "Thank you." He turned. "For what?" "For making me feel seen." She left before he could answer, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and the echo of words she'd never planned to say. On his desk, where her glass had been, lay an envelope she'd slipped beneath it, thin, folded neatly, addressed in her handwriting. He didn't notice it until the office was empty. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a hospital invoice stamped urgent. For a long time he just stared at it, the night replaying in his head until the truth began to sink in. He thought she'd come for him. But she'd come for survival. Ethan sat alone in his office, the sunlight creeping across the floor, golden and merciless. The invoice lay open before him, the ink slightly smudged where her fingers must have touched it. His name wasn't on the paper, but her desperation was. The total was circled in red. The words at the bottom read, "Treatment suspended pending payment." He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. He had seen this kind of plea before, from strangers, from people who wanted something from him, but this felt different. There had been no request, no bargaining. She hadn't even asked for help. She had given him something else instead, her dignity, in exchange for nothing she could keep. The realization burned. He'd mistaken survival for seduction. He could have sent the payment. It would have cost him less than a single bottle of the wine served at his galas. But the truth was, he didn't know if doing so would fix anything, or just remind him of what he'd taken without understanding. Downstairs, the building stirred to life. Phones began to ring. Assistants hurried across the lobby. Another day of numbers and negotiations beginning as if nothing had happened. He folded the invoice once, slid it into his desk drawer, and locked it. For the rest of the day, he didn't call her. He didn't ask his staff to find her. He told himself it was better this way, a clean line drawn between guilt and grace. But that night, as he stood in his penthouse, the city stretching beneath him like a map of glass and light, he found himself looking for her reflection in the window. Every passing figure below could have been her. Every sound of footsteps in the hall made his chest tighten. Days turned into a week, then another, and when he finally asked his assistant to locate her, the answer came back like a verdict. "She's gone, Mr. Cole, resigned without notice, no forwarding address." He nodded, pretending it didn't matter, pretending he hadn't memorized the sound of her voice or the way her eyes had looked when she said thank you. He tried to bury himself in work, but everything began to feel meaningless. Meetings, profits, contracts. For the first time, success tasted hollow. It was a month later when he received a message from the hospital. His company had been billed automatically through a charitable foundation he hadn't used in years. The invoice amount matched exactly. Someone had paid it and left a note on the record. In memory of Grace Brooks, from a friend. He stared at the name. Grace Brooks, her mother. The silence that followed felt endless. He didn't know it then, but that payment would be the last trace of her for nearly half a year. She vanished as completely as if the city had swallowed her whole. Until one night, at a charity gala in Los Angeles, he turned and saw her again. Different dress, different posture, different woman, but the same eyes. 6 months later, Los Angeles shimmered under a warm spring night. The rooftop of the Celine Hotel sparkled with chandeliers and champagne. The city below looked like fire and glass. To everyone here, it was just another charity event, another evening of laughter and lies dressed in tuxedos. To Ethan Cole, it was an obligation. He smiled for cameras, shook hands with people who admired his fortune but not his face. The same routine, the same emptiness. Until he saw her. She was standing by the terrace doors, clipboard in hand, headset looped around her neck, calm, composed, almost unrecognizable. The simple black gown she wore wasn't a servant's uniform, but something sleek, professional. She moved through the crowd like she belonged there. For a moment he thought he was imagining her, a ghost stitched from guilt and memory. But then she turned. Their eyes met and the world fell out of focus. Sienna froze. The glass in her hand trembled just slightly before she set it down. 6 months of silence collapsed into that 1 second. "You," he said, stepping closer. She gave a small, polite smile, the kind people use when they want distance. "Mr. Cole, enjoying the evening? You're working here?" "Event coordination," she said, tone steady. "I manage things now, not clean them." He should have congratulated her, he should have walked away. But something in her calmness felt like punishment. "You disappeared," he said quietly. "I had to," she replied. "My mother passed. I needed time." He flinched. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," she said, looking past him. "You did what you were supposed to. You forgot." The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to explain, to tell her he hadn't forgotten, that the silence had followed him every day since that morning. But she was already turning away, already moving back into her world of schedules and decor. Later, when the party reached its peak, He found her again, standing alone by the city lights mirrored in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said without looking at him. "Neither should you," he replied. She turned, and something in her face softened. "What do you want, Mr. Cole?" "The truth," he said, "about that night." Her expression didn't change. She reached into her bag and handed him a thin folder. "Then read it." He opened it. Inside were documents, hospital forms, bank transfers, medical reports. The night they'd spent together laid out in ink and bureaucracy. He looked up, confusion and guilt twisting in his chest. "You used me." "I didn't use you," she said quietly. "I needed your signature. They wouldn't accept the payment without authorization from a corporate account. You wouldn't have listened if I'd asked, so I gave you something you would." Her voice didn't shake, her eyes didn't drop. She said it like someone who'd already forgiven herself. Ethan closed the folder. The noise of the party seemed to vanish. All he could hear was the wind and the faint sound of her breathing. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because I didn't want your pity." "And what do you want now?" She looked out over the city, where the horizon blurred into the dark. "For you to understand that I never wanted your money. I just wanted time. Time my mother didn't have." He swallowed hard, every word cutting deeper than he'd expected. For the first time in years, the man who never lost control didn't know what to say. "You said that night changed everything," she whispered. "For me, it ended everything." She left before he could reply, leaving the folder in his hands and the unbearable truth behind. He didn't notice the eyes watching them from across the room, eyes filled with something darker than jealousy. The folder sat heavy in his hands. Around him, the laughter returned, the chatter resumed, but it all sounded distant, like a memory he wasn't part of anymore. He looked up just in time to see her disappear through the terrace doors, swallowed by the golden light of the ballroom. He stood there for a long time before following, but when he finally stepped back inside, she was gone. It should have ended there, another brief encounter, another story left unfinished. But somewhere in the crowd, someone had been watching. Someone who'd seen the look on Ethan Cole's face and the way the woman beside him had made it change. That someone was his cousin, Evan Cole. Evan had grown up in the shadow of Ethan's empire, always second, always smiling, always waiting. He knew how to pretend loyalty. He also knew how to destroy a man quietly, one piece at a time. The next morning, a new headline appeared on a gossip blog, one that shouldn't have existed. Ethan Cole's mystery maid, mistress or manipulator. The article was short, cruel, and specific. It mentioned Sienna by name. It mentioned the hospital. It mentioned one night. By noon, the story had spread across half the business networks. Whispers of impropriety, questions of ethics, stockholders calling for statements. Ethan's phone didn't stop ringing, but he ignored them all. There was only one person he needed to find. He called the event company first. No record of Sienna Brooks. He called the hotel. No one by that name on staff. She'd vanished again, leaving behind nothing but that folder. By the third day, the noise had turned into a storm. Cameras waited outside his office, reporters at the gates. Inside, the board demanded an emergency meeting. He sat through it in silence until Evan spoke. "We need transparency," Evan said, voice smooth as oil. "The press won't rest until they have a name. Better we give them one." "You mean hers," Ethan said quietly. "She played you," Evan said, pretending sympathy. "You owe this company honesty." Ethan looked at his cousin and saw something he'd missed before. Satisfaction. The faint curl of a smile that didn't belong in grief or anger, but in victory. "You did this," Ethan said. Evan didn't deny it. He only tilted his head. "You were slipping. I fixed it." Ethan stood so fast his chair hit the floor. For the first time in years, his composure cracked. "You leaked a lie." "I leaked a story," Evan replied. "People decide what's true. You should know that better than anyone." That night, Ethan packed a single bag and boarded a private flight to Chicago. He'd found one trace of her there, a catering license registered under her mother's name. It was the only lead left. The city greeted him with snow and silence. He found her 2 days later working at a small diner near the river. She was wiping down tables when the bell over the door rang. She didn't look up at first, but when she did, she froze. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Cleaning up a mess I didn't make," he said. For a moment neither moved. The smell of coffee, the crackle of the old radio, the world outside falling into a quiet snowfall, all of it felt suspended in time. "I told you to forget me," she whispered. "I tried," he said, his voice low, "but you keep showing up in my mistakes." She sighed, setting down the rag. "You should go. You've already lost enough because of me." "No," he said, "not because of you, because I let someone else write the story for us." He reached into his coat pocket and placed a small recorder on the counter. The red light blinked once. "Evan Cole," he said quietly, "has been selling company secrets, leaking fabricated stories, and bribing journalists. I have proof, but I need you to trust me one more time." She stared at the recorder, then at him. The same rain-colored eyes, the same exhaustion, the same fragile defiance. "And if I don't?" she asked. "Then he wins. And you stay the villain they made you." The snow outside thickened, blurring the world beyond the window. She reached out, pressed the stop button, and held the recorder in her hand. "What do you need me to do?" she said. And just like that, the war began. For hours they sat in that corner booth, the old clock above the counter ticking between them. The recorder lay on the table, silent, red light blinking in time with their words. Ethan explained everything, the board meeting, the smear articles, the threats that followed. He showed her emails, signed transfers, coded messages, every piece leading back to Evan. Sienna listened, unmoving. Her fingers brushed the edge of her coffee cup, but she never took a sip. When he finally stopped, the silence felt heavier than the snow pressing against the windows. "You should take this to the police," she said. "And watch him twist it into another lie?" Ethan replied. "He owns half the people in that building. I need a truth he can't erase." "And what does that have to do with me?" "He'll come after you next. The scandal isn't finished. He needs a villain, and you're easier to destroy than me." Her jaw tightened. "You think I haven't been destroyed before?" Ethan didn't answer. He looked tired in a way she hadn't seen before, not the exhaustion of wealth, but of guilt. He rubbed his temple, then spoke quietly. "I can clear your name, but I can't do it without your voice. You recorded your conversation with him, didn't you?" Her eyes flicked up, startled. "How do you—" "Because you don't run from pain. You collect proof." She didn't deny it. After a moment, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small flash drive. "He tried to pay me off," she said. "Told me to disappear. Said I'd already been bought once." "And you didn't take it?" "No," she whispered, "because I wanted to hear you say my name again." Ethan looked at her, startled, the air between them sharp with everything unsaid. The truth in her voice cut deeper than any accusation. "Then we end this together," he said. "Together?" she repeated. "We expose him. You release your recording when I release mine. Every secret, every lie, every signature. Once it's public, no one can bury it." She stared at the drive, the reflection of its light flickering across her palm. "If I do this, my name will be everywhere again. I'll never have a quiet life." "Maybe not," he said softly. "But you'll have the truth, and your mother's name deserves that." Something inside her cracked, the part that had learned to survive by staying invisible. She nodded. "When do we start?" "Now," he said. They left the diner together just before sunrise, snow falling harder now. He offered her his coat. She refused at first, then took it when he didn't move. The warmth of the fabric carried his scent, cedar and rain. By the time they reached his car, the world outside the windshield was nothing but white. "You're sure about this?" she asked as he started the engine. "I've never been sure of anything," he said, "until now." That day, everything changed again. They didn't return to New York. They didn't call the board. They drove to a small cabin he owned near Lake Michigan, the only place he said no one would find them. The plan was simple: gather proof, release the recordings, and disappear until the storm settled. But simplicity is the first thing to die in war. Because Evan Cole already knew. By nightfall, he had people watching the roads, tracing accounts, following names, and before the snow melted, the war between blood and truth began to spill out of shadows. The world would soon know everything, but not in the way they planned. The cabin stood at the edge of the frozen lake, quiet, untouched by the world beyond the snow. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and dust. Ethan moved through the small space like a man returning to a version of himself he didn't trust. Sienna watched him, unsure whether to sit or stand. "You've been here before," she said. "A long time ago," he replied. "Before everything became complicated." He lit the fire, and the orange glow flickered across his face, softening the sharp edges of control he wore in the city. For the first time, he didn't look untouchable. He looked real. They worked through the night. He spread out documents across the table, transfer records, internal memos, emails between Evan and journalists. Sienna connected her drive, the recording of her meeting with Evan's assistant playing through the laptop speakers. "Miss Brooks, let's not pretend this wasn't mutual," Evan's voice said on the recording. "Take the money, stay quiet, and this all goes away. Isn't that what you wanted from the start?" Her voice came back, calm but cold. "No, I wanted you to tell the truth." The playback ended. The fire crackled. Ethan exhaled slowly, then turned off the laptop. "That's enough proof to burn him," she said. "And maybe us with it," he murmured. They both knew what exposure would mean. Public trials, endless scrutiny, the kind of ruin that didn't fade when the cameras left. But the truth had a weight heavier than fear. Outside, snow began to fall again, harder this time. The storm blurred the world into a gray silence. "We'll send it to 3 outlets at once," Ethan said. "If one hesitates, the others won't." "And when they come for you?" "They already have." He looked at her, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then he said quietly, "You don't have to stay for what comes next." She smiled faintly. "I didn't stay for you before. I stayed because I couldn't walk away from what was right." He wanted to tell her something, maybe thank you, maybe forgive me. But the words wouldn't form. Instead, he handed her a phone. "Send it," he said. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She pressed send. Somewhere miles away, files transferred, servers blinked, inboxes filled. The truth began to move faster than either of them could stop it. By dawn, every news outlet in the country had the same subject line: evidence of coal industry's fraud and media manipulation leaked. Ethan stared at the screen as headlines multiplied. Sienna stood beside him, her reflection next to his in the window, 2 people watching the world they'd both helped build start to fall. "You did it," she said. "We did," he replied. "So why do you look like you've lost?" "Because I have. My name, my family, my peace." "Peace isn't silence," she said. "It's the sound that comes after the truth." He turned to her then, and for the first time since that night in the office, their distance vanished. No more questions, no more lies. Just the quiet understanding that sometimes destruction was the only way to rebuild. But as they stood there, the snow began to glow faintly red in the reflection of distant lights. A car stopped at the end of the drive. Headlights cut through the trees. "You expecting anyone?" she asked. "No," he said, his voice low. They watched the lights move closer, slow, deliberate. A shadow stepped out into the snow. "Stay here," Ethan whispered. He opened the door, the cold rushing in. Outside, beneath the pale dawn, Evan Cole was waiting. Ethan stepped into the cold, breath clouding in the dim morning air. Evan stood a few feet away, hands in his coat pockets, the faint smirk of someone who'd already decided how this would end. The sky above them was gray, colorless, heavy with the kind of silence that comes before breaking. "You didn't think I'd find you," Evan said. "You always underestimate me." "You never stop proving why I should," Ethan replied. Evan took a step closer, his shoes sinking into the snow. "You leaked everything. You just buried the company, your reputation, your name. For what? For her?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "For the truth." "Truth doesn't pay bills," Evan sneered. "You always cared more about redemption than survival." From the cabin doorway, Sienna watched, her hand on the frame, the firelight behind her. She wanted to call out, but something told her not to, that this moment had been coming long before she'd entered their world. Evan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a small black envelope. He held it up. "It's over. Whatever fantasy you built with her, it's over. You'll never step foot in that office again. You're finished." "Then so are you," Ethan said quietly. "Because I copied every document, every account in your name. By now, every agency in the city has them." The smirk faded. For the first time, Evan's confidence cracked. "You wouldn't," he said. "I already did." They stood there in silence, two versions of the same man, one made of greed, the other of regret, the snow falling between them like ash. Evan turned to leave, his voice low. "You'll regret this." "I already did," Ethan said. When the sound of his footsteps disappeared into the wind, Ethan stayed outside, watching the road vanish into white. Only when the cold started to bite through his shirt did he return to the cabin. Sienna hadn't moved. She stood beside the dying fire, her face lit by the last of the flames. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done," he said. "He'll answer for everything." "And you?" "I'll lose everything I built," he admitted. "But maybe it's time." She walked toward him slowly, her bare feet silent on the wood floor. "So what now?" "Now we start over," he said. "Not as who we were, but as who we could be." He reached for her hand. For a moment, she hesitated, then let his fingers intertwine with hers. No promises, no conditions, just a quiet, fragile truth. Outside, the first light of dawn broke across the frozen lake. The snow had stopped. The storm was over. Weeks later, the headlines shifted. Evan Cole, indicted on fraud charges. Cole Industries to restructure under new leadership. Ethan's name disappeared from the news as quietly as it had arrived, and Sienna Brooks opened a small design studio in Chicago, modest, bright, and alive with color. The sign above the door read, "Grace Atelier." Sometimes, when the doorbell chimed and the city's cold air rushed in, she still turned as if expecting to see him there. Tall, quiet, wearing that same weary look that first made her curious. And sometimes he was. Not the man she met in a penthouse of glass and silence, but the one who'd chosen truth over power, the one who learned that redemption doesn't come from money or control, but from being seen. They never called it love. Not out loud. It didn't need a name. It was something softer, something that lived in the spaces between words. And on nights when the rain returned, tapping softly against her windows, she would smile, remembering the one moment that began it all, the night she'd stood in front of him, shaking, desperate, unafraid, and said, "One night, that's all I need." She hadn't known then that it wouldn't just change her life. It would change his. Forever.